So it's a move of desperation. The Russians are desperate at this point. Really, the Kremlin is desperate. I don't think the average Russian gives a shit at this point. I believe they're probably starting to lean towards, let's just get this over with. But the reality is, the Russians or the Kremlin is trying to find ways to justify like growing its war effort. One of those ways would potentially create this sham referendum in which a fake vote or a real vote will take place, but the outcome will be faked, so it'll look favorable to Russia, and therefore, like Crimea, these two oblasts will be considered Russian territory. They will be owned by Russia, and any Ukrainian fighters in that are now invaders of Russia, so they can say, we've been invaded, we need to defend the Russian homeland. Yeah, okay, whatever. But the world knows different. And many of their pundits are saying that, oh, well, now NATO equipment is launching into Russian-owned territory, so we can retaliate against NATO. This was, I don't remember the girl's name, one of the idiot pundits, Simonian, I think is her last name. Anyways, they would say, NATO equipment is being used, so we can retaliate against NATO. First of all, you don't want that smoke. See my previous video. We would skull drag you across Eurasia. Second of all, there's a problem for Russia as they don't actually control all of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. There's a significant amount of Ukrainian fighters, so it would largely be a symbolic referendum. And their argument that now Ukraine is attacking and invading Russian territories doesn't hold up because they didn't have the same response to NATO or to Ukraine when Crimea was being attacked by the Ukrainians using NATO weaponry. So it's very disjointed, it's very illogical and nonsensical. And because of that, Russia probably won't do as much as we think. Putin is putting himself into a very interesting position with a referendum to try to justify a general mobilization, because the minute he has this referendum, he's in the place where now Russian territory is occupied, according to him, and Ukraine will still continue to move. And then it also starts to distinguish this idea of, then where do we stop? If we're already in Russian territory, let's continue to drive on to create a buffer zone. Russians don't have the ability to defend its own territory if Donetsk and Luhansk are considered Russian. The Ukrainians are going to push forward to what they believe is their border, whether Russia says it's theirs or not. In fact, I believe they will continue to push until they have Crimea back at this point now. They have the initiative, they have the upper hand. So this referendum largely means nothing to the Ukrainian war effort. It largely means nothing to Western supplies and their efforts to help the Ukrainians. What it does mean, though, is that Russia is becoming desperate and is potentially trying to create a narrative to mobilize larger forces. Now, when we say mobilization, we're like, oh no, here come the Russians finally with their massive military. Well, here's the thing. They had trouble feeding, supplying, providing ammunition, providing medical care for the small amount of troops that they sent to Ukraine. Do you really think they're going to be able to mobilize a large war effort and supply that? They have lost thousands of pieces of equipment. Those aren't being replaced. The Russians are unwilling to use their most advanced weaponry, of which they have very little anyways. I think they have something like, I think it's at most 15 of their most advanced 5th gen fighters, and I think it might only be 6. I don't remember honestly off the top of my head, but they're not going to use those. You know why? Because all of the U.S. Equipment to exploit and to scan and to understand is flying around. We will see and go, oh shit, we can totally see their shitty 5th gen fighter on our radar. They don't want that. Russians don't want that. They don't want to have one shot down in the Ukraine and the Ukrainians holding up their 5th gen fighter and then going, here, US, analyze it for your benefit. It's the same technology the Chinese use. The Chinese don't want that either. I bet you that was one of the things expressed in the meeting between Xi and Putin Don't you dare start fucking giving away the farm on jointly used technology so that the U.S. can exploit it. So they won't use their most advanced stuff. And even if they did, they don't have very much of it. They don't have very much advanced equipment. They're running through their stockpiles, and then just throwing more mobilized people at the problem is going to be a problem because they aren't training their fucking people either. Just giving like, here's 100,000 people, go run at them with like fucking, I don't know, bayonets or something, is just going to get more of them killed, and it's just going to lead more to an overthrow of the Kremlin within the Russian population, because a general mobilization will imply that the people of Moscow and the people of St. Petersburg have to go, and they're not willing to do that. I don't think they're willing to fight the Ukrainians for whatever reason at this point, and I think they would be smart enough to understand that the Russians invaded Ukraine. The Ukrainians are trying to fight them to get them out of Ukraine. Any kind of referendum that suddenly, in Russia and Russia's eyes only, maybe Belarus too, says this is now Russian territory and Ukraine's in it, all of us are going to collectively go, okay, whatever. You can say whatever the fuck you want, but we all know the reality. We have a map that goes back, I don't know, 6 months. In fact, we have maps that go back to the real borders in 2013. So it's just desperation. It's just a bunch of games they're trying to play on their domestic stage, because the international stage, they're not fooling anyone. But domestically, they're still trying to justify this war, and they're trying to justify growing the war to the ability to potentially prosecute it the way they want, which is turn the tides against Ukraine. However, I just don't think they have the supply lines, the knowledge, the willingness, or the command structure to prosecute a larger mobilization and push them into Ukraine with an adequately supplied, trained, and motivated force to counter what is objectively a superior Ukrainian force who is well supplied, provided with high levels of intelligence and equipment, as well as very, very motivated and now being trained by Western militaries.